I'm not sure there's a real good textbook on how you move away from the White House. I've talked to various of my friends who have done it before me, and essentially what they say is it'll take about 3 to 6 months to sort of decompress, get the adrenaline out of your system. It's a very unusual working environment where pretty much everything that you do is likely to be on the front page of the New York Times or the lead story on CNN on any particular given day. And going back to a normal life after that is different. It's not difficult. It's not challenging. It's something that no other position can prepare you for. The energy, the group of people, the again the adrenaline that is there every single day. I talked to Sarah Huckabee Sanders after she left, and she told me that she didn't realize she was addicted to the adrenaline. And it actually took her weeks to start sleeping regularly again. Keeping in mind, most of us were working 16-hour days every single day, and to go from that to a more normal lifestyle it can be a real shock physically to your system. Yeah, I think the answer is no one knows, and that we are very much moving in uncharted territory. We're going to spend, as you've mentioned, at least $6 trillion on this. That's about 150% of what we would spend in any given year. So we've essentially increased the size of the government by 150% for a given year. And we've not done that going back, even I think as far back as World War II. So we certainly moving in a region where our models will be tested, our understanding of economics will be tested, and there'll be tremendous risks. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the recent activity, including during the Trump administration, was driven more by politics than by economics. For example, we were talking about a second and third stimulus package even before the money in the first stimulus package had been spent. So unfortunately, it looks like, as is not unusual in Washington, D.C., politics is driving things more than economics. And it's a huge gamble that we and the rest of the world are taking together. I think left to his own devices, Joe Biden is the exact kind of person who would want to and try to unite the country. He has that reputation. He is a deal maker. He's a nice guy that a lot of folks from both sides of the aisle like. And under ordinary circumstances, having him come in as president might allow him to sort of be the person who takes the initiative on uniting the country. He faces a couple of different challenges, though, that make this an unusual set of circumstances. Number one, he does not have a lot of political capital in his own party. Keep in mind, most people did not vote for Joe Biden. They voted against Donald Trump. The 80 million people that voted for Joe Biden or checked his name, at least, were not really voting for him because they were passionate about him. They just hated Donald Trump. So that's an unusual circumstance in our system where the president comes in, where everybody knows he's not bringing half of the country with him necessarily. He doesn't have that political capital of a newly elected president. Secondly, there are already questions being raised about whether or not Joe Biden will be a one-term president and whether or not he'll be physically able or interested in running in a second term. So with that looming over him, it further weakens him. Bipartisanship takes strong leadership, especially in the majority party. Ronald Reagan was bipartisan because he could make Republicans do things they ordinarily might not want to do. Bill Clinton could do the same thing with Democrats. I'm not sure that Joe Biden has the political capital necessary to sort of cajole his own party into working with Republicans, and that bodes poorly, I think, for bipartisanship. A couple different things, not just on the American agreement, but more broadly as well. I think you'll see the federal government, the United States government, get more involved in these multilateral agreements like the Paris Climate Accords, probably go back now and talk about joining the TPP. The Trump administration preferred bilateral agreements. The Biden administration, I think, has a proclivity for multinational agreements. Aside from that, I think a lot of the foreign policy will stay the same. The language will become much more calmer. The temperature of the rhetoric will be lower. But for example, the positions on China will be strikingly similar. I think you may have noticed that in its first weeks, the Biden team actually declined the opportunity to remove some of the tariffs on European goods, as a part of the Boeing Airbus dispute that the Trump administration had put on. And I think you'll see that sort of continue. Keep in mind, the Biden team ran on a build it back better and a buy made in America policy, which was strikingly similar to President Trump's Make America Great Again, Buy American program, so that there are a lot of similarities in the programs. Yes, the language will change, and yes, there'll be important changes in some places, but I think underneath it all, a lot of the policies will stay structurally very similar. I do. In fact, if we don't, I think everyone will be stunned. You cannot have this amount of economic stimulus, this nearly $6 trillion now, and not see some impact on economic growth. If you don't have that, then certainly all of your economic models are wrong. I don't think that's the best question. The better question is, what level of inflation will we experience, and what level of inflation are we willing to tolerate as we do have that growth that exceeds 3%? Keep in mind, it's been a long time since the Western world has had to deal with inflation. I remember 16 and 18% inflation rates when I was a young man. Inflation generally defined as too much money chasing too few goods. And when governments all around the world do nothing but print dollars without having a correlated increase in productivity and production, the setting for inflation is set. So again, I don't think growth is the issue. I think inflation is the bigger issue. And I think most of the markets and most of the governments around the world are starting to pay attention to that. Yeah, I think they're starting to. I think that if there is a silver lining, and it's hard to say there's a silver lining on anything as completely destructive as the pandemic, but I think 10 years on, 20 years on now, when books are written about it, one of the things that will be written is that the veil sort of came off of China as a result of the coronavirus. Whereas they were masquerading as a first world nation, as a leader amongst nations, of an aspiring great country, and really expose them for something else. Great countries don't hide information about potential global pandemics, for example. And I think, if anything, we've learned over the course of the last year that China cannot be treated the same as other first world countries. China, for example, just this week banned the BBC in its country. Germany would never do that. Australia would never do that. Japan would never do that. China, China expects to be treated like a leader amongst nations, as a first world nation, it needs to start acting like one. So I do think that the Western world now, the Western democracies especially, are starting to recognize that you cannot treat China the same as any other major economy. Well, I think the threats obviously are of bubbles, right? When money is free, when interest rates are low, asset prices are going to go up. This is axiomatic. Everybody knows this is going to happen. But to see such a disconnect between the underlying economies all around the world, I think Great Britain just saw its economy drop for the biggest in the biggest percentage since the Black Death. So the impact on these economies around the world of the coronavirus are real, but you're not seeing it reflected in those equity markets. And I think that disconnect creates a tremendous amount of risk. Certainly, it helps buoy an economy when your markets are healthy, because folks' retirement plans are good, their investments look like they're paying off. So it's better to have those markets buoyant. But if it belies an underlying weakness, it could be very, very dangerous if things take a turn for the worse in a short period of time. I don't know. We've started an investment fund focusing mostly on my work in the financial services industry. We think that Wall Street misunderstands Washington. In fact, we think most people misunderstand Washington. Washington is a different kind of place. I didn't understand it until I got there 10 years ago, and I spent 6 years in Congress and now 4 years essentially in an administration doing a lot of work in the financial services sector. I was the acting director of one of the larger overseers, regulators, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So we're paying a lot of attention to that area. Also be staying active a little bit in Republican politics, probably more policy than politics. I think the 2022 elections are going to be extraordinarily fascinating from my party's perspective, as how we deal with Donald Trump as this former president who's still very much active in the sphere. And then obviously looking forward to the 2024 elections, where I think there'd be a very good chance there'll be no incumbent. Could be as many as 20 Republicans and 10 to 15 Democrats running in 2024. So as is so often the case, politics in America is going to be a very fluid situation, and I'll be staying involved in that from both a political and a policy standpoint.